Hey everybody, welcome to Objectively Put. So just recently, Bernie Sanders announced his bid for the presidency in 2020. So as I've done with the other Democratic candidates, I'll give a breakdown of his record and some things to take note of. We'll start with the good. He has a 100% rating from the Human Rights Campaign. He has an A plus from the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. He has a 94% from the American Civil Liberties Union. He has an A from NICA Action. Now, I don't know if it's NICA or NICA. Let's say NICA. The NICA Action is an important grassroots civic organization that wants to advance peace within the Iranian American community. So the goal is to stop the demonization of the Iranian people, because most of us, most of them are just like you and I. We have to admit, post 9/11, Americans have been at the very least skeptical of people from the Middle East and at most physically hostile. So that organization is really important for the much needed culture shift. He has a 91% from the League of Conservation Voters. That's based on environmental issues. Great. He has a 21% from Numbers USA. 21% is bad, but that's good for him. And it's because they are responsible for a lot of the false fear around immigration. As a point of comparison, Ted Cruz and other Republicans of that ideology oscillate between the low 80s to mid 90s percentage-wise when it comes to Numbers USA. So, and you know what they're about. He has an 18% with the United States Chamber of Commerce, and that just basically means he doesn't side with the agenda put forth by the largest corporations in the country. And he has the best score on that, by the way. He has a 5% from the Americans for Prosperity. Again, really good, because the idea behind this group is economic freedom. Historically, that means unfettered capitalism, and the very reason we have for-profit companies in healthcare and education, and amongst other things. When you include profit motives in something as basic as healthcare, people with less or no money will be left to die in a lot of situations. And I'm not making that up. There are tons of stories where people go to the hospital just to find out if they aren't covered for major ailments, or go bankrupt because of inadequate coverage. It's the reason people like Dick Cheney can get a new heart whenever he needs it, while normal people have to worry about EpiPens and the price of things like that. Moving on. He has a 0% from FreedomWorks, yet another pro-big business group who operates under the ruse of economic freedom. When I just told you historically what that means in America. He's been good on civil rights. He's been good on women's rights. He aggressively pushes for Medicare for all, and is the reason it's now a national discussion. Huge supporter of the Green New Deal, and if anybody recalls from 2016 primary, he talked a lot about climate change and that being the biggest global threat we face. And even before that, if you were to go further back in history, he's been talking about it for some time. He takes no corporate PAC money. Most of his money comes from small dollar donations. He pressured Disney into paying their workers a $15 minimum wage. Really good. He also crafted a bill called the Stop Bezos Act, aimed at getting Amazon workers a higher wage, and the direct result of that was Jeff Bezos paying all workers at least a $15 minimum wage, and calling on other corporations to do the same. I could go on about some of the things he's done, like when he was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, or his time as a congressman, or even his fight for civil rights before he was an elected official, but it's extensive. Important, but extensive. It also proves the point of his consistency as an individual, what he believes in as a person, which is really important when honesty seems to be running government. Granted, there's no way to perfectly gauge that, but a lifestyle and consistent voting record to back it up is our best measure when judging politicians. Now we can move on to the bad. He voted for the 1994 crime bill, but there's a huge caveat. There's actually three. One, the bill was going to pass without his support. Number two, he knew the ramifications of the bill and spoke for some time on how poor communities, especially those of color, would be targeted and greatly impacted. And three, the bill included some much needed protections for women when it came to them being placed in violent situations. Now, some may argue that not good enough reason to vote for it, but this unfortunately is what happens to a lot of bills. They can start off ugly, get amended to include some of the good to gain the needed support from lawmakers, and we end up with a mixed bag of a law. And as I said before, it was going through anyway. To what I've seen on it, no other lawmaker made the case, and it's important to know where they stand. Um, Now, he was also asked about reparations for the descendants of slaves in a recent CNN town hall. His answer was unsatisfactory because I, because he was being honest to a fault. So when asked, he named a few institutional biases that blacks face and discussed trying to even the playing field. So when asked again, he said it depended on what the definition of reparations means. And even though I actually agree with him, the truth is his delivery on it was terrible. Because look, if reparations were to come in the form of a lump sum of money for African Americans or bigger investments in the community, that would help, but would be a temporary fix. See, unless the fundamental underpinnings of how blacks are treated in law enforcement, housing, banking, educational system, I mean, you have to look at places like Flint, Michigan. The poor to poisonous water quality has led to developmental issues that handicap people of color for life. So while the conversation about reparations is important and absolutely necessary, it's a layered response that's not easy to produce. That being said, this was an opportunity for him to make his case, and it didn't land, and he didn't hit hard. Like it or not, elections are a popularity contest, and questions need impactful answers. We have other candidates saying they want reparations for the descendants of slaves. The good news is, it's great to hear that. The bad news is, they don't have the legislative records to give anyone who pays attention to policy confidence that they'll even follow through or even try. The point is this: Bernie needs to reach out to communities of color and create an agenda that can pave a path to reparations. And I think that's all a part of the broader conversation that needs to be had. Moving on. He hasn't been the strongest on foreign policy. He's one of the best in calling out the Israeli government on its violations to Pakistan and he's against regime change. He's also against the military-industrial complex that just gets fat and rich from supplying the means to bomb and kill anyone and everything. But Bernie hasn't laid out a detailed plan for how he plans to address these issues. They are complex issues, don't get me wrong. But when one side, mostly the Republicans, and we have Democrats that do it, but when we have people like that salivate at the mention of a bomb fest, we need someone that's equally aggressive in the opposite direction. So here's my conclusion. Bernie Sanders is seen as a far left candidate. It's important to know that only goes for U.S. politics. Among the global map of industrialized nations, Bernie is a centrist. It's just that the American political spectrum is so far right that he seems far left. Sure, we have social policies that give our country the appearance of a left-leaning nation. And on the ideas that are popular, we are left. But the fundamental underpinnings of how government is run, it just goes straight in the right-wing land. We are an oligarchy. It's been proven that the will of the people, just isn't reflected in government. Money interests run it, and you can see it's like a constant theme where money from the private interest is given as campaign contributions, only to later have legislators enact to support private interests. I mean, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez even exposed congressional orientation as an indoctrination process, where lobbyists from huge corporations teach lawmakers how to craft legislation. And if that ain't corrupt, I don't know what is. So, if for whatever reason anyone negates all of what I said, know this. Bernie changed the entire national conversation. Now we talk about having Medicare for all to cover every American. Now we talk about a Green New Deal that would transform our energy system to help ensure a better future for our kids and planet and create hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of jobs in the process. Now we talk about getting big money out of politics and moving in the direction of public financing. These are all important conversations to have because before him, those ideas seem to range from the edge of impossible to not even considered or discussed. And here's my last point. I'm recording this, and tomorrow's the last day of Black History Month. So by the time this gets out, it won't be Black History Month anymore. But people spend all that time reflecting on MLK, and he's loved nationwide. He wasn't loved at this time, but he's loved nationwide now. And MLK was able to help get equal rights for African Americans. He was assassinated when organizing the Poor People's Campaign that would address class issues as he saw being the real fight in trying to gain an equal society. Bernie is no MLK. Do not confuse that. But his policies align directly with King's philosophy, and that is the way forward. And that's my opinion. Most of the last part was my opinion, but I went over the good and some of the bad, and I leave everyone to make the judgment for themselves. Until next time, take care.